This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, the media's romance with North Korea. Backed by popular demand, Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the writer/editor of the blog The Point, that can be found at frontpagemag.com. Best blog in the universe. Daniel, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you so much. It's been a while.
Just before we continue, any update on the hat?
Well, the hat is still on my head, I think, but viewers will be able to monitor that better than I can because sometimes I lose track of it.
Okay. All right. Daniel, got the Winter Olympics in South Korea. North Korea, everything I've been studying all these years, the stories about the concentration camps alone can keep you up at night. This is just one of the most vicious, brutal, sadistic regimes in history. And the leftist media, instead of talking about these things, just fawning coverage of North Korea, and they're just going crazy over this murderous tyrant's sister, Kim Yo-jong, just going crazy over her. She's the deputy director of the Propaganda and Agitation Ministry or whatever. And, you know, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, oh, you know, she's a princess. Oh, she's the Ivanka Trump of North Korea. Very sickening stuff, no?
It is very sickening stuff, but it's a replay of exactly what the media was doing with the Soviet Union, with Communist China, with Cuba, with every single communist dictatorship. And for that matter, even with Iran, it does not take very much for the left to start fawning over a communist dictatorship. They have been doing it very consistently because they actually like communist dictatorships.
Yeah, and in part of this coverage, they called Kim Yo-jong a political princess with a sphinx-like smile. So what we have here, Daniel, is you're saying, these are the political pilgrims, the fellow travelers. This is continuing. So I spent my life studying this, you know, the leftists that went to Stalin's Russia, Maoist China, North Vietnam, Sandinista Nicaragua, Castro's Cuba. The sociologist Paul Hollander is the godfather of documenting all this. I studied it throughout my life. They're just venerating these dictatorial regimes, these adversarial cultures and movements. And you have also studied this, Daniel. I want to ask you this. There's a phenomenon here where the leftist wants to shed himself of his own unwanted self, blur his own individuality into the totalitarian collective whole. We know that this is part of the phenomenon here. But in a very deep sense, you have written about how the leftist wants to gain his own notion of immortality when he worships these totalitarian regimes. Can you comment a bit on that?
Well, the left is to some extent a secular religion, which means it delivers the promises, the challenges traditionally associated with religion, with the higher spiritual idea in this actual world. And it does so, obviously, one of the things religion does is it tells us we are immortal. We are not subject to death. We can transcend death. Now, how does the left deliver that in this world? It does that by joining us to collectivist movements. That's a theme explicitly addressed in a variety of texts, including 1984, where the idea is that if you join the collective, you become immortal, and the destruction and the degradation of the individual, the censorship, the entire totalitarian aspect of the left is the right of that religion. By destroying the individual, by repressing the individual, you become part of the collective, you become immortal, because individuals die, but the collective goes on. And when you look at a lot of these displays, the cheerleaders the media was celebrating, the even more out there displays in Beijing. It's the basic idea that if everybody acts in unison, if everybody becomes indistinguishable, if they cease being individuals, they will take on a kind of larger immortality. And this is also what the left has been telling us, that if we conform, we'll be on the right side of history. We will have this great destiny. As individuals, if we dissent, if we don't conform, then we're disrupting them. We're preventing them from realizing this great religious mission that they're on to save the planet from individual misbehavior.
Thank you, Daniel. Wow. I mean, when you talk about this unison stuff, I've dedicated my life to trying to figure this out, the left. And I know that, even in North Korea and Stalinist Russia, when they're all marching like that, that march that they have, and it's perfect and it's all in unison. I know leftists. They love that stuff. I know there's one particular leftist that went to Cuba one time. I know him quite well years back. There was some kind of hurricane there or whatever. And he was just telling all of us that, the Castro regime, it got everyone together and then everybody was marching and everything in unison. But he was very, very excited, just enthralled with the collective manner, the unison manner in which the Castro regime and everybody took part in working on that hurricane. What is it about this? The leftist is there's a hatred of the individual and just this fascination with this unison, with this, when the individual is blurred out of existence and that marching together, right?
That's the central leftist idea. Individuals are bad. Individuals will pollute. Individuals are greedy. Individuals are racist and sexist. But when we're all together, when we're all part of one great collectivist whole, we can actually realize our ambitions. So individuals are flawed, but together we can achieve redemption as this giant amorphous being. Now, religion tells us that as individuals, we need to actually pursue a relationship with God individually. The left doesn't say that we should pursue a relationship with God. Instead, we need to become part of this kind of leftist God substitute, this collectivist monstrosity that's usually built around the cult of personality. So it's the Kim family in North Korea, with Stalin in the Soviet Union and all the various other dictators, Fidel Castro, Mao, so on and so forth, Obama in America for that matter. You have this giant figure around whom this cult of personality is built, and there's this collectivist mob that worships him by acting in unison and supposedly transcending their individuality, because that's the idea. You transcend the individuality, you become part of the collective. It's like the Borg.
Right. And as always, they just sacrifice humanity on the altar of their ideals. And this North Korea story, I watched a documentary the other night, the interviews with the defectors, and what happened to their families, and what happens to North Koreans in those concentration camps, let alone even in society. It's just a heart-wrenching, heartbreaking story. And the left doesn't care. It's very callous. And so you would think that the New York Times or Washington Post or Rachel Maddow or Anderson Cooper or Don Lemon, you'd think that if they were real humanitarians, they would be really pushing, even during their coverage of this, that that Kim Yo-jung should be confronted with the question about what happened to that American student Otto Warmbier. And Mike Pence brought one of the parents, I think he brought the father, to the Olympics. And you would think that the media would be highlighting this story and also creating a situation where Kim Yo-jung would be forced to confront the reality of what happened to Otto, who died, as we know, after being tortured in North Korea.
When Otto was actually still a captive in North Korea, the left, as you know, was mocking him and saying that he was a privileged frat boy who got what he deserved. This has always been the left's position. The left did not care about any of the victims of Stalin's atrocities and massacres. The New York Times helped cover it up, for that matter. And there were American leftists who went to the Soviet Union early on because it was supposed to be this great revolutionary homeland, including a number of African Americans. A number of them were actually killed in the Soviet Union. The media never discussed the subject. They never touched it. They never relayed reports from them. So there's a consistent history of the left covering up these atrocities, of them either demonizing or covering up the victims. Again, whether it's Cambodia, whether it's Cuba, whether it's China, whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it's now North Korea, they don't want to talk about these victims. Because, as Walter Duranty, I believe, used to say, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Right.
That was just one of those eggs.
Yeah. Just really disgusting stuff. The narrative of the left, it's just, this is the heart of darkness. Daniel, in your coverage of all of this, there's all this talk about collusion, Trump and the Russians collusion. But in your coverage of this whole North Korea thing, the media's North Korea coverage, you write that that's the real collusion. Tell us about this real collusion that you believe is the real story?
You know, one thing that just happened now was that Russian mercenary forces staged an attack on American forces in Syria. And under Trump, we actually fought back and we won. Well, under Obama, he was there on the microphone telling Medvedev that he'd have more flexibility to sell out American interests after the election. And this, in a nutshell, for me, really sums up the difference between Obama and Trump. The Democrats are compulsively accusing Trump of collusion. But meanwhile, the real collusion has always been their eagerness, their desire to appease enemies of the United States, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's North Korea. The moment North Korea gives them any material to work with, just like Iran, they rush to whitewash these monsters, these monstrous regimes, while at the same time demeaning ours. You mentioned them describing Kim's sister as the North Korean Ivanka Trump. You know, they've said much nicer things about her than they've said about Ivanka Trump. What does that say about them?
Right, right, absolutely. Daniel, what is the ultimate significance of this story of the media, you know, just this love fest with North Korea? What do we take away from this?
Well, President Trump called the media the enemy of the people, and of course the media got very upset about that and began claiming that this is how Stalin described the press or whatnot. The reality is that they do show that they're the enemy of the people. They're the enemy of freedom, and they have far more in common with Stalin, with the propagandists and the propagandist press of the Soviet Union, whether it was Pravda, the propagandist press of North Korea or China, than they do with anything American. They're not an American institution. They're a radical leftist institution. They're a fundamental threat to our freedoms.
Absolutely, Daniel, you know, because I, just in terms of my own character, I'm interested in lots of things. So I don't watch things just because I like them. And why I'm saying that is, you know, I'll watch things just to analyze them or whatever. And also because of my political life and because of the culture war, we'll also study the left. And you know, so we watch things that we don't necessarily support or like, whether, you know, some kind of, you know, even a stupid movie or bad news, etc. So what I'm getting to is, you know, I'm watching Don Lemon, I watch Anderson Cooper, I watch Rachel Maddow. Sometimes it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And, you know, lately, every time I put it on, I just know that I'm putting it on the anti-Trump propaganda network. They hate Trump so much. But I want to end with this. Who do you think, in your mind, when you're studying all these leftists, who are some of the worst characters? Who's at the in the moral sewer, in your opinion?
Well, unfortunately, it's a bottomless moral sewer. So as bad as CNN is, as bad as the New York Times is, there are always worse sites. There are sites that are coming up increasingly. There are sites like The Intercept. At the same time, even formerly mainstream, I mean, I wouldn't call the Washington Post mainstream, but it had far more credibility 5-6 years ago than it does now, when it's just become an outlet for extremely radical voices. So that's also part of the problem. The media is constantly sliding further and further to the left. The CNN 5 years ago was nothing like CNN right now, when it just spends all of its time shouting about conspiracy theories. So the media is on a race to the bottom, and the race isn't fed by any specific organization in the media. It's the collective. We were talking about collectives before. There's a kind of a collective network within the media that coordinates, that pushes it further to the left. One of the stories I was discussing today, actually, where parts of this network would try to get reporters who are politically non-conforming fired. They will organize campaigns against them. So there's the larger coordination of the left within the media that's pushing it to the bottom. And it's not so much the individuals that matter. It's not so much the individual organizations even that matter. It's the existence of this network itself, which defies the idea that we have a free press, when what we actually have is a left-wing network.
Absolutely. Daniel Greenfield, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me once more.
And thank you very much for joining us this evening. Make sure you go to Daniel Greenfield's blog, The Point, at frontpagemag.com. And please remember, we're a fan-generated program. If you like our show, please go to jamieglazov.com to support the program. And please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. Good night.